Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the third Meditations and Transformations. I invite you into the future's consciousness that belongs to all of us. And before we get started, as is already commonplace with the other Meditations and Transformations videos, I want to read to you 3 brief descriptions of transformation. Transformation itself is the evolutionary pathway of all living things. Transformational futuring, which we often talk about here, and it's one of our goals, is the expansion of consciousness through anticipatory imagination. Very important. That's what we're going to talk about on this week's Meditations and Transformations. Across time, space, and experience that reveals emerging novelty and transformational realities. And then last but not least, transformational development is the application of transformational mindsets and pathways among communities and ecosystems that results in environments of empathy, care, love, and wholeness. So on tonight's Meditations and Transformations, I want to touch on, again, as I said, what we would call imaginal anticipation or anticipatory imagination. It's very important, especially in terms of thinking about what we should be doing in this hour, in this day, in this time, in this era of futures thinking and foresight. Are we using foresight in a way that only empowers the present systems of what is? Or are we utilizing futures thinking and foresight, imaginal anticipation or anticipatory imagination, to really understand and to give birth to what if? There is a fantastic video that I all want you to go watch after you look at this brief meditations. You can find it on YouTube. It's a video of Bonnitta Roy. I don't believe it's by Bonnitta Roy, but the people that have been making these short videos of some of Bonnitta Roy's philosophical underpinnings and ideas have been doing a great job with these. This one's about 10 minutes long, and you can look it up just by the name of the video. It's called The Wicked Mush of the Inbetween. And in this short video, Bonnitta really brings us into a place of understanding the life cycle of the caterpillar to the butterfly. And of course, there's that liminal space in between, the pupa, where the caterpillar turns into sort of a scientific mystic mush before it then becomes a butterfly. It literally dissolves. And that's what we're seeing in our world all around us right now, where many would say that we are in a polycrisis. Many different crises, all compounding upon one another, none having a similar basis or starting place or emergent gate, and compounding in a way to bring us to the end of the world. You hear the word polycrisis. You also hear that we are in the Anthropocene, and that is framed very much as the end of the world. But when the butterfly is changing from a caterpillar and is in that stage of the pupa, do you think that life itself, or let's say for a moment that we can imagine that the caterpillar has this philosophical mindset about the whole transitory change, thinks that, the wicked mush is the end of the world? Or is it the end of an era? Or, as Bonnitta Roy says in the video, the wicked mush of the in-between that you're going to love, is it really a time between worlds or a world between worlds? And so, just like the caterpillar and the butterfly don't imagine the mush in between to be a crisis, it's a great question, are we actually in a crisis? I want to read to you briefly something that I wrote tonight or earlier today on LinkedIn. You can find it if you follow me on LinkedIn, but no need to go there because you're watching this video. Metacrisis, polycrisis, Anthropocene, but are we really in a crisis? Or an incredible time between worlds, a period of reframing our temporal, spatial, and experiential perception. Pulling only from our present zeitgeist are images of the now, are the trends which are today, and the pathways that we really identify because they're already here, that define what is happening right now, and not what's emerging really. This leaves us in a state of imagination deficit. That continues to reinforce what is, not lead us to what if, from the caterpillar through the pupa, the mush, into the new world of the butterfly. But that middle space is not only a time between worlds, it is a world between worlds. It is a world in itself. And that's an interesting thought, and something that in Futures and Foresight, we need to really embrace if we're going to use Futures and Foresight, this Futures consciousness that belongs to all of us, to really enforce a new way of seeing and acting in the world. Our Foresight and Futures thinking efforts need to break free from the desire to create stability on either side of what we perceive as the crisis. Just as the mushy pupa does not consider its state to be a crisis, but instead a transitory interval of liminality that is giving birth to transformational realities through this anticipatory imagination or imaginal anticipation. So watch that video, but also I want to direct you to an article by Jonathan Rowson called Prefixing the World. And I want to read you just a very brief piece of what Jonathan says, because he writes, and this is just from last week, that it's very important that words are important themselves. And are we in a polycrisis? Or is it better defined as a metacrisis? And maybe it's not really a crisis at all, but this meta part is very important. Because as he says in the article, poly and meta mean very different things. While poly highlights the multiplicity and variety of crises that we're in, their emergent properties, their cascading risks, it leaves us as a kind of despairing spectator in suspended animation, awaiting instructions that haven't come. Poly tacitly compounds the problem of subject-object dualism. We're outside of all of this that is driving the global problematic with an emphasis on propositional rather than participatory knowing, and multiple ways of participatory knowing. Minds that are separate from bodies, humanity separate from nature, technology separate from culture, people separate from power. The elasticity and ambiguity of meta, which means within, in between, and after, and beyond, not only provides a richer context for our predicament, but serves to highlight different qualities of crisis. In my inquiry into crisis over the last couple of months, I have come to realize that pathways to viable futures may depend less upon solving a crisis than freeing ourselves from the hold that the idea of a crisis is having on our minds. If we're stuck in crisis, we may need to let the idea of crisis go, or let at least it be relegated somehow. All of which is to say, with meta still in mind, that there is also an imperative to start to move beyond meta, crisis perception and mentality, toward a more discerning relationship with the world. As we free ourselves from our attachment to crisis, and its most literal metacrisis means after crisis, by the way, we start to pay more and better attention to what crisis thinking may unhelpfully perpetuate or even occlude. For instance, we may start to attend better to what Bonnitta Roy calls complex potential states. If you go read the Guide to the Natural Foresight Framework, you'll see that it's built upon complex adaptive systems, complex responsive processes, and complex potential states. That's why the Natural Foresight Framework is so powerful. Or what Nora Basin calls phenopoiesis, the pre-emergent states, and paying attention to them because within them lay great possibilities that we've yet to even imagine, or imaginal anticipation. These are different ideas, though I don't think it's entirely incidental that both of them come from women. And both draw attention to the value of what is latent, unseen, yet perceptible, the cooperative trait of perceiving emerging realities, holoptic foresight dynamics, through the kinds of subtle and appreciative inquiry that are precluded by the I can fix it crisis mentality, or I would go so far as to say by the I can fix it foresight mentality that a lot of foresight work has today. So I just want to leave you tonight with this idea that instead of living in polycrisis, or even in metacrisis in a way, that we can begin to use imaginal anticipation to build, or to unlock, I should really say, this cooperative evolutionary trait, innate trait, natural evolutionary trait that perceives what wants to emerge, aphanopoiesis, emerging novelties, that then empowers or activates the co-creation of transformational realities. Holoptic, the many-eyed dragonfly, foresight dynamics. I hope this short meditation encourages you towards more imaginal anticipation or anticipatory imagination in your own life. And as I said in this short post, it empowers you to see foresight and futures thinking and futuring in a different light, not as a way to identify change and service to obsolete systems, but rather as a perception of emerging novelty to usher in the transformative realities of new eras, not of polycrisis, not of metacrises, not of anthropocenes, but rather of symbiocenes, of meta-generativities, of polycultures. Leaders, organizations, governments, I'm looking straight at you, but aren't we all? I'll see you on the next Meditations and Transformations.